Mortal Shell is a remarkable debut project for developer Cold Symmetry, a game with the appearance of a much bigger budget release despite a smaller sized team. Okay, it's built on Unreal Engine 4 much like just about everything else these days, and you can't ignore the huge Dark Souls influence here either. The affection for From Software's series runs deep, from the controller layout to the targeting system, to the way it sends you back to an area start on death. It's a familiar gameplay loop and Souls fans will feel right at home. But Mortal Shell brings plenty of its own ideas too, plus a darker gothic art style. Most impressively of all, it's releasing on 3 platforms at launch: Xbox One, PS4 and PC. And I'll say this right now, the Enhanced X version is the best way to play on console, with it boasting the best 4K support and smoother performance than the base machines. So how do the 4 consoles compare, and what does PC offer in extra visual features? Let's find out. Let's look at the resolution side first. I can certainly say Xbox One X has the clearest picture of the bunch, rendering at 3200 by 1800 as the max target. There's seemingly a dynamic element on X2, as with all console versions. In the depths of the opening Fulgrim hub area, for example, you get drops to 2880 by 1620 as a more typical resolution. It scales well to a 4K screen regardless, and we have HDR support too. As an aside, if you want to squeeze more clarity from the game, you can turn off film grain and motion blur outright in the menus. They can be a little aggressive out of the box, though for me, both effects did add to the rather muted aesthetic. Your mileage may vary though. Also, if you want to go the other direction entirely, check out the Indie mode, dropping the internal resolution to around 480p for everything on screen. It adds to the challenge a bit, and it's a little like how Mortal Shell might have looked on a PC in the mid-90s. Let's now look at the worst case by comparison, base Xbox One, the S model in this case. Looking at the sky, the engine renders at 1600 by 900, that's 900p maximum with barely any rendering load. But look across the marshlands and the resolution visibly gets dialed back. Pixel counts are especially difficult in Mortal Shell, with a temporal anti-aliasing in play and a rather subdued level of contrast on edges, but I do see drops to around 720p in effect. A wide view of Fulgrim's centre shows up 1152 by 648 lowest, so the drops can be quite significant, and it creates this muddy texture to the output. I think comparing Xbox One S to X together makes a good point of it. For image quality, you get a huge, satisfying gain going with the X model. While we have the side-by-sides up, I will say differences between the two otherwise are quite scarce. These are the two extremes on console power-wise, and yet really, Xbox One X's 6 teraflop GPU is mainly being used for a higher pixel count. Pop-in isn't measurably different, texture assets are the same too, though you'll notice post-effects tricks like depth of field and motion blur render differently on base Xbox One. Ambient occlusion shading is also lighter on the X model, though all of these are subtle changes beneath the thick layer of film grain. All versions, including PC, use screen space reflections too, so no machine misses out in this sense. Resolution targets are again the main distinguishing point. A word on the PlayStation consoles here. PS4, much like the Xbox One, targets 900p as the top number while looking right at the sky. The difference? Well, PS4 actually holds that target more consistently, and even at peak stress points the result is much sharper. The lowest pixel count on record is 1440 by 810, but that's it so far. Ps4 Pro meanwhile goes one better. At launch there was no enhanced patch, so 900p has been the resolution ceiling till now. Since then, we now have a patch to bump it up to 1440p as the peak target. As 4K support goes, it's the go-to number for Pro, and gives it the next best image after X here. No question, 30fps is the reality on console. You'll have noticed drops too on the base models, which I'll cover later on, and that's where PC support is invaluable. 60fps is by far the biggest benefit for going with PC. It just gives you more information per second for a precise dodge roll or riposte. On top of that, using the full bandwidth of an SSD means vastly improved loading times. For a game where respawning at a checkpoint is a matter of course, Mortal Shell really benefits from this snappier turnaround. In visual side-by-sides with console, you'll also notice maxed at ultra settings, better effects, finer close-up textures, and some differences in color grading. The motion blur gets a subtle upgrade too, plenty of options to work with then, and it must be said, the experience feels that much better for it, but especially for the higher refresh. A quick word on how Mortal Shell actually plays. Enemies in the opening Fulgrim area are unforgiving, and navigating this hub area, a maze of marshlands and ancient trees, takes some trial and error. No question though, it uses Dark Souls as a starting point, but weaves in plenty of new mechanics to keep it fresh. The main one being the ability to harden on the spot like a statue. Suppose you've initiated an attack, a long wind up to a swing, only to then realise an enemy's going to disrupt it with a strike. You have an option here. The harden ability on L2 can be triggered at any time, even mid-attack or roll, to cancel out theirs. It's a new defensive move, turning your body into a carapace-like shell that shatters on impact. And it works, it's a stylish effect, and a great tactical option to go with the riposte on L1. A few other changes stand out too. You inhabit one of 4 shells across the world, hence the name, each with different combat abilities. The twist? Well, when you're on the last dregs of your health, you're thrown out of that shell to reveal a weaker base skeletal form. From here you have a lifeline in a lengthened stamina bar. It then becomes a game of trying to beat the remaining enemies in order to get back into your shell. All round combat is weighty. There's a great sense of impact to every strike, a real crunch to every slash, and the 30 FPS target on console still works well for it. The Fulgrim marshland is well realised too. It's one of many areas, but as an opener, very easy to get lost in, filled with winding bends, cemeteries, tunnels and secret passages. So the question then, how does all of this hold together at 30 FPS? And are there moments where consoles can struggle to deliver? Good news first, Xbox One X and also PS4 Pro for that matter run very consistently at 30 FPS in general. There's the odd one-off hiccup as you enter Fulgrim, accompanied by a tear line right at the top of the screen, but that's it. And while the higher refresh options on PC are missed, the motion blur at least blends the action at 30 FPS. Based on the initial hub area, performance is given a pretty good test. Clusters of enemies by campfire and long draw distances on terrain, all of it flows well. If we turn to the base consoles next, this is where the issues do creep in. Even running at 900p, expect drops under 30 FPS at times, especially on base Xbox One. Expect hits to the mid to high 20s during battle, and also some disruption for the flashback sequences. In fact, I noticed Xbox One fares especially poorly here. The frame time reading on the left trills up and down between 16 and 50 milliseconds, creating very uneven camera motion. Screen tear is also a bigger factor on both Xbox One and PS4, but since it appears in brief flashes, it's never all that intrusive overall. On the whole though, the base machines are still very playable. The majority of play is still 30 FPS, but do go in expecting drops. The enhanced machines solve most of these issues. Mortal Shell plays with the format of Souls games and finds its own identity in the small details. The initial hub area is darker, and while it's broken up with tunnel crawling, it feels unique and has a great air of dread. The combat is solid too. Targeting isn't quite as snappy as Dark Souls, but there's huge potential in the hardening system and finding new shells to mix up your style of play. The fact a smaller team managed to forge such a nicely realised world is impressive too. In this way, it has parallels with, say, Ninja Theory's work on Hellblade's Senua's Sacrifice, a game driven by smart artistic choices using Unreal's toolset. Not only that, but the team has done wonders by managing to factor in 5 platforms here overall. The only thing that must be stressed is the base consoles do lag behind a little in performance, and ideally X, Pro or PC are the best ways to play. That's all from me today though. If you did find this quick look at Mortal Shell useful in any way, feel free to let me know by liking or subscribing, and don't forget to hit the bell to get notifications as any new video lands. To get a high quality version of this video, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net as always, and to get in touch just use Twitter. But from me for now, thanks for watching.